Well, I don't know what your preaching style is. And there's lots of different, the verse to verse, chapter to chapter, theme kind of preaching, sermon series. One style of preaching that I've never done a lot of is allegorical preaching, where you take, certain sort of stories, oftentimes Old Testament stories, and you go, this means this, or this is an allegory of that. It's commonly practiced in different cultures. One of the cultures that I was privileged to be a part of, even for just a short while, was the African culture. I went to Africa for the better part of a few weeks and got to listen to some different African preachers. And they seem to love this style of preaching, the allegorical style of preaching. And, whatever you think, well, it's not good expository preaching. I tell you, when it comes to church, there is nobody who knows how to do church like the Africans. I tell you, I have never had an experience of church or an experience with God like being in a black Burundi church service. It was about a 3-hour service, and it was heaven come down to earth. I couldn't understand a word they were saying, but God's presence was there, and I have never experienced church like that. And a lot of what we do in North America that we call church is like playing in the mud puddles versus being in the ocean. So don't knock allegorical preaching. Don't knock some of these kind of things unless you've experienced some different kind of church services. But I wanted to try my hand at an allegorical message around recovery. But before I do that, let me just say again, if you're a pastor and you're looking for help, maybe things like porn have got embedded in your life or have re-emerged in your life, maybe for a season of your life, you've had success or victory, but now for whatever reason you find porn getting back into your life, a little bit like that old Arab proverb, if you leave the nose of the camel under your tent walls, it will, you'll eventually be sharing a bed with it. And you might be in the place where you feel like now you're sharing a bed with porn and you can't seem to get it out of your tent. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to connect with you. I do Zoom calls with guys, one-on-one coaching. I do groups of pastors. We get together and encourage each other. Oftentimes, it's not any of my wisdom. I just sit back and observe, watch the amazing dynamics between fellow strugglers, people learning and growing and finding freedom together. So if that interests you, please connect with me at bandofbrothers.care at gmail.com. Okay. So let's do a bit of an allegorical lesson here. And I called this podcast Kick 'Em Out. And this is using the whole Old Testament story of taking the promised land, taking our desired ground in this new promised land in recovery. And it just so happens, like a lot of you, I use the Bible app. I've been going through kind of the 1-year Bible reading plan. I'm definitely behind, but I have been working through the book of Joshua and now just entering the book of Judges. So some of this has been on my mind, but I just see so many parallels between the story of taking the promised land and what we are trying to do in this place of recovery and walking away from unwanted sexual behaviors. So, the story from the Old Testament. Moses is gone by this time as we get into Joshua, and Joshua is tasked with leading the children of Israel across the Jordan River into the promised land. Those opening commands or encouragements that we've probably preached on before. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Remember those ones, right? And God says, I will be with you. In fact, he talks about going ahead of the children of Israel into the promised land like a hornet. Now, I've only experienced hornets a few times, and whenever I experience a hornet, I usually run. And God is saying, I'm going to be like a hornet going ahead of you. I will drive out these 7 nation armies that are occupying, Canaan. I'm going to drive them out ahead of you. And he's very clear to them, even before they cross the Jordan River. Do not let them remain in your land. Drive them completely out. Don't intermarry with them. Don't drive them out. Otherwise, they will be a snare to you. You will end up worshiping their gods. You will end up adopting their lifestyle. And you will invite my judgment on your land. Things will not go well for you if you do not drive them out. Now, you remember that story, right? And, of course, the obvious parallel for those of us who have found things like the struggle with porn or fantasy, masturbation, whatever, those kind of areas where we have allowed the sexual camel, so to speak, to get into our tent. We've allowed those things to get embedded in our lives. And we now are looking at this going, if I'm going to experience my promised land, if I'm going to experience the things that God has for me in this ministry, then I need to drive out those things from my life. Otherwise, they will ensnare me. They will be a trap for me. They will keep me from God's promises in my life and through my life. Right? So that is such an obvious and clear connection or parallel that we can draw. So, as you know the story, they cross the Jordan River. God affirms Joshua's leadership, similarly to how he affirmed Moses' leadership in the Red Sea. And they cross the Jordan. They end up, Jericho falls and some of those situations. So now what you see is they start. AI is a bit of a blip. We'll leave that out for a second. But you see them start, and early on, you just see success after success after success. They start strong. Most of all of their battles, with the exception of AI initially, are victories, and they take over increasing parts of their promised land, right? And so it starts really good, and you see this, and everyone's excited, and God is with them, and they're experiencing real victory. And you might have experienced real victory in this journey. You might have gone through a real season, maybe even years, where things like porn or other things were not at all a part of your landscape, right? And you experience victory, you experience freedom. And then what happens, we see, as you start moving through Joshua, you start seeing a loss of momentum. And what happens is you see, instead of them going from victory to victory, they begin to lose their momentum. And as you get near the end of Joshua, you see Joshua's increasing frustration. And he makes this statement. He says, basically, how long will it be before you take possession of the land that God has given you? How long will it be before you take possession of the land that God has given you? And in good African pastor speak, I would say, how long will it be before you take full possession of the land that God has already given you? Right? Do I get an amen? Right? So as we look at the story and we see what goes wrong in this story, why is it, with all these amazing promises and God promising to go ahead of them, why do they simply not take over land that they are supposed to? where do things go wrong? Well, I want to give you 2 or 3 things in great allegorical fashion from them. The very first one is we see the story of the Gibeonites, and they use deception or lies. And they basically, now, the Israelites don't ask God who they are, which is always a problem. But basically, the Gibeonites know, man, we're going to be toast here. We're going to lose our land or be driven out. So what they do is they come up with this great deception, and they say, hey, we're really from a long way away. We're not from here at all. And of course, the Israelites are suckered in. They don't inquire of God, and they end up making a treaty with them. But the bottom line, the treaty was based on deception, on a lie. And most of us, we at some level believed a lie that allowed porn, allowed these things to remain in our lives. We thought, well, you know what? Just a little bit's not going to hurt. Or I can start this, but when I get in ministry, I'm really going to clean my act up. Or most of us started our porn behaviors when we were single. And the lie was, you know what? This is not a big deal. When I get married, I won't have to deal with this. This will just tide me over until I get married. This will be easily expelled, right? And it was that lie. Some of us, the deception that we continually practice is we go, you know what, just a little bit's not going to hurt. So with the lies we tell ourselves are, you know what, I'm not going to maybe do the hardcore porn stuff that I used to do. I am just going to spend time scrolling and edging on Instagram or YouTube, and I'm just going to live with low level, sexual arousal. And it's a lie we tell ourselves. Deception. Deception is what the very first thing that caused the problem for the Israelites. And if they'd inquired of God, they would have realized the deception. It would have been clear, and they could have responded appropriately. So that's the first thing that went wrong. The second thing that went wrong is the children of Israel, they began to make alliances, but it was in a really subtle way. So we already see we see this, and as you get to the end of, Joshua and into Judges, you're almost tempted to skip over some of these passages because he goes through the land allotment of all of the different tribes. But as some of the tribes basically take over their whole area and they're successful. But then as you go through it, you begin to get this sort of narrative that happens. You see that the tribes allow the Canaanites to stay because they look to them to serve them. For example, Ephraim says, they did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day, the Canaanites live among them, but are required to do forced labor. So whether they thought they were too strong, we'll get to that in a minute. But the bottom line is they go, you know what? We can use these Canaanites. They can do all the hard work for us. A little bit like how they were treated in Egypt. Why don't we just get them instead of driving them out completely? Why don't we turn them into our slaves? They made an alliance with them. They used them. They thought, okay, they basically said, okay, we can control them, right? And how many of us thought, you know what? I can be in control of this. This is not going to become unmanageable. We make little alliances in our hearts and our minds, right? And that's what they did. And you see that increasingly in frequency. This tribe did not dislodge them or did not take over their land, but they let them stay as their servants, as their slaves. Okay, and they made, I'm sure, all sorts of compromises in their minds that was okay. Sure, we were supposed to kick them out completely, but no, you know what? It's okay because they're serving us. This is still okay. So again, partly based on deception, but alliances that were made. That's the next one. The next one that happens was this idea around, you see entering into different tribes, fear and intimidation. Now remember, they were told, do not be discouraged, do not be afraid. The Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. But we see this beginning of this belief in their minds. You know what? We cannot get rid of these tribes. Why? Because they are too strong for us, right? After all, they have Abrams tanks. Well, not quite, but they had the closest thing to Abrams tanks in their day. Their enemies, they had iron chariots, right? The Israelites didn't have iron chariots. These tribes were stronger than they were. They had better technology. And so, for example, one of the tribes of Joseph goes back to Joshua and says, Joshua, we don't want this part of the land because the Canaanites live there. They have iron chariots. Can you give us can you modify the land that we get so we don't have to deal with these iron chariots, right? Joshua is not buying it. Joshua says, though the Canaanites have iron chariots and though they are strong, you can drive them out. Now, did they have iron chariots? Absolutely. Was their technology superior? Yes. Were they stronger than the Israelites? Yes. But the reality was the equation was not complete. God had already promised to fight on their behalf, right? So with God in the equation, all of a sudden, the Israelites had the ultimate support and power behind them. But Joseph, in this situation, the two tribes of Israel, all they were concerned with, and they had got to the point, whether it was fear or intimidation or discouragement, they were basically saying, you know what? They're too strong for us. We can't drive these things out. And I've had, pastors say to me, Vern, I've tried everything. And this has been with me most of my adult life. This is too strong for me, right? I guess I'm just going to have to make peace with it. And I get that in one sense. If you've only ever known porn, for example, as a part of your life, it's so hard, and you've experienced defeat after defeat and years of trying and not being successful. I understand why you're going, you know what? I just don't know. I mean, I might talk a good talk, but deep down, I don't know if I'm ever going to get rid of this thing in my life. It's like an iron chariot in my life, and I'm going at it with a slingshot. Right? So why did the children of Israel start bogging down? Where did the momentum, where did they lose the momentum? Well, it was because of deception, lies they believed. It was because of alliances they made. It was because of fear or intimidation or discouragement. All of those things, I think, us who struggle with porn, our lives, or those who struggle with unmanageable behaviors, whether it's whatever that is, we can resonate with that. We can go, you know what? I sometimes feel like those tribes. I've been told that I'm supposed to dislodge it, but the reality is that I've not experienced the success that apparently has been promised to me. So, well, where do we turn? What is the solution? Well, the solution, first of all, let me just say, is not to just let them stay in our land, not let the camel into our tent, not to allow those behaviors to remain lodged, right? We do need to say, I'm all about driving them out. They're not going to stay. Well, obviously, part of this process is, as you read through the story of Joshua and Judges, is you see some really interesting dynamics. Here's the first thing. I love the idea that the tribes learned, the smart ones learned to work together, right? They learned to say, so for example, You know the story of the 2.5 tribes on the east side of the Jordan. They said, we're going to go over to the west side. We're going to leave our flocks here, but we're going to go and fight for our brothers until they've received their promised land. When they've received their promised land, then we will go back. So you already have that it's not individual tribes, it's tribes working together. One of the greatest, the best example of this is in Judges 1. That was what I read this morning. And in Judges 1, you have, I think it's Judah, and they're given a certain amount of land that they're supposed to go and defeat the enemy. And this is what they say. Judah says to Simeon, they say, come up with us to fight against the Canaanites. And then we in turn will go with you into your land, and with you fight your battles. I still think that fighting together, back to back, as it says in Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1. For if one falls, there's no one to help them up. Cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. You know that passage, right? I just did a podcast on the Finding Traction side, where I think people overly individualize their battles. They overly spiritualize things, thinking just them and God are going to win the victory. And I think when it comes down to us finally taking the land, taking our promised land, we need to learn to, number 1, be honest and humble about what we're going through. And number 2, invite our brothers to come in and fight with us so that together we can see the kind of breakthroughs we've always hoped and dreamed for. So there you go. There is a little bit of my attempts from my quiet times the last few days at allegorical preaching. I hope some of that sticks with you. And if you can make it to Africa anytime soon, go to a church service. Heaven will come down and meet you. But in the meantime, I pray that you would learn to fight alongside your brothers and you would experience the promised land in your life in every way. God bless you.